Alrighty, so my name is Emily Yamasaki and I'm in San Diego. And today is August 9th, 2020. And I'm interviewing Abigail Woods from Stillwater, Oklahoma for the oral history project titled COVID-19 Teacher Poets Writing to Bridge the Distance, which will be archived by Oklahoma State University Oral History Research Program. So, hi, Abigail.
Hi.
So could you just start us off by introducing yourself and telling us about how you became an educator and where or what you're doing now?
So I have been raised here in Oklahoma, and I'm currently at OSU. And I think my education really just started, my career with education started definitely with my love for English and reading. And that definitely spurred this. And as I have gone into my career, I really found a deep passion for it and teaching, and I love it a lot. I currently work at a daycare here in Stillwater as a head teacher. And in the summers, or most summers, I go to West Virginia and work in a summer camp. And I run a creative writing program there with middle school age children. And so I have the plans to go to high school level when I graduate with my degree, but I have kind of worked with all ages now. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. So we're going to just kind of get right into it. So going back to March 2020, how did you learn that teachers and people in your state were going to have to be maybe quarantined or not? What were you up to around then, and what was going on for you?
you know, I avidly follow the news and politics on a global level. And so it was not a surprise to me when we started shutting down. I think I had expected it and been kind of aware of it a little longer than at least most of my peers that I'm around. And it wasn't a big surprise, but it was definitely a big change, especially with the college. I think, the colleges let out long before the public schools did here. And so we were out at spring break and we never went back. And that was definitely an adjustment. It was different. And we finished out the semester online and we're supposed to go back in person here in the next few weeks. But
Wow. And how did your your professors and your peers react to having to switch from I was on spring break and I was planning to come back, but here we are.
so OSU sent out an email about 2 weeks before spring break, and they were just kind of like, we don't know that we're going to be coming back. This isn't the official announcement that we're not, but there's a good chance that we won't be. And before spring break ever let out, we did end up finding out that we wouldn't be going back, which was, I think, the right decision, regardless of how it did end up affecting everybody, especially students. But it was just kind of a crazy ride. Nobody was prepared. It was so hard. The transition, you take professors who have never had online classes and they're trying to transfer everything into a digital format, and it didn't work for everybody. OSU thankfully let students who needed it have the pass-fails options that didn't affect your GPA, like a lot of major universities did. And so I know that helped a lot of people. I was fortunate enough to make the online stuff work, even with the transition. And even for me, it was very hard.
And what about the daycare that you were working at that time?
The daycare was an interesting transition. I started at the daycare just after Oklahoma kind of started going into quarantine. And so I kind of showed up at the daycare and they were at extremely low enrollment. They were using grants to pay us that the government was giving to daycares so they could stay open. Oklahoma was very, very adamant that the daycares needed to stay open so healthcare professionals and essential workers could have somewhere for their children to go when they went to work. And so Oklahoma did manage to give out some grants to daycares and other facilities like that for keeping them open, because there's no way a daycare, especially one, I work at a nonprofit, can run at a 30% enrollment. And so it was an interesting transition. When I started, I only had about 7 kids, about 6, 7-year-olds. And it was a very interesting transition. None of them were really okay with it. they didn't really know how to accept it. It was hard to explain to them what was going on. But we still never wore masks at the daycare or at the school during that time. It's when you have children that young, it's so hard to keep a mask on. They don't want you to have it on. It scares them. They're used to being able to see your face, to see you talk to them, to see your mouth move. And they don't like it. You wear a mask in front of them and they're reaching at your face, pulling it down for you. And it, for them, was just a really horrible transition, I think. It was hard, and I don't think that, especially in Oklahoma, that we handled it the best. We did it later than everybody else, and we didn't really take note of how everybody else had done it and their failures and their successes in doing it. And so it's been, even up to now, a very chaotic and learn as you go thing. And right now, the city in Stillwater, we do have a mask mandate, but because it's a daycare, we don't have to have them on. And so it's we're still able to go maskless, and there's no other way the kids would let us near them. And so it's part of it. But I think that will hold true throughout all grades when we start school here in the next few weeks, that you can't force these kids to have a mask on 24/7. And so I don't know what to think. I don't know really what the path is through going and staying on a non-in-person setting, but it seems like the right one, because even at the daycare level, I see things that would play out also in a large-scale school, and I wonder really how that's going to ever manage. I can't imagine we manage in-person instruction for longer than a couple weeks.
And I know that during this time when in March and in the spring, that you kind of jumped into ethical ELA and had some writing. So I actually, you have a poem that you want to share with us that you've written called "Come Worship with Us." So I'd love to hear you read that and maybe talk to us about that poem a little bit.
Okay, for sure. Come worship with us. Do you ever wonder why the congregation sing? Why even the most devout have a moment of self-infatuation, an existential crisis of sorts in the pit of a Sunday sermon? My God, I am certain that even the most ardent skeptic could be convinced of the Almighty in the shoulder-to-shoulder GA parish, in the audience to a midnight worship. When was the last time you felt God's presence, stood face to face with the King of Kings, competing with the holy vibrations of industrial subwoofers and amps, a steeple for all and one? I am convinced that God is a bass drop, the first wave of a monumental night, baptizing the flock of sinners before it, washing away the grime of a religious experience.
Wow. And did you want to tell us more about what that poem symbolizes for you?
Yeah, so for me, I think this was one of the first things that I really wrote once things had started to take traction with COVID here in the US. In March, I am a music lover, and live music has always been something that has been in my life since I was 14. I've probably been to more concerts than anybody that I know has in their entire life, and it's something that's an important part of my life. But when this started happening, all that went away, and it was kind of a hard transition. Music has always been a big, important part of how I stay social and how I maintain contact with people who I don't see every day. And it's a whole community of people that are there for the same thing you are. And it's such a communal and uniting experience. And I haven't had it. And now I think about 6 months, we haven't seen anything. Nor would I want to go to anything right now, unfortunately. And for me, that was hard. And this was the first time I think I really was starting to realize how difficult the transition was going to be without all these events and things that I have always had in my life. And it's been interesting, but for me, this poem really embodied that. and that concern and longing for it.
Thank you. Let's move on to how COVID-19 has really impacted Oklahoma. I know you kind of mentioned a little bit about that, but how did you feel about your state's response and then therefore how it bled into both your work and your personal life?
The state was slow to respond, which doesn't really necessarily surprise me. Oklahoma's not known for being ahead of the game. And unfortunately, that has maintained itself through this whole situation. Our governor, Kevin Stitt, was the first governor in the U.S. to get it, which isn't a surprise. He has not really ever been seen wearing masks. He doesn't really acknowledge it. He, in the midst of all this, has been kind of just starting tribal feuds. And we haven't had a whole lot of leadership from him, especially now that we're approaching going back to school in the fall. He has been an avid supporter of all in-person instruction, send them back, no questions asked, with absolutely, no concern or empathy for the teachers and educators of the state who are flooding out at a crazy rate anyways. Now we're seeing more of a loss, and there are schools starting to face the problem that they don't even have enough staff to run in-person instruction. And so Stitt hasn't been really involved in it. He hasn't said a whole lot, other than that he agrees with Trump and that we are going back to school in person. Unfortunately, I don't foresee that lasting. And we're going back to college in person too, here in Stillwater, and everyone I know has said the same thing. There's no way. We have students who are they're phasing the dorms in a way that they haven't before, in smaller doses of students. And they are, if you come from out of state, testing you, and you have to be tested before you get moved in to some degree. And I don't know the whole process, but I know that the numbers of students coming in and testing positive have already been kind of high. And so it's been an interesting thing to see. We're going back to school, but we're looking at the NBA that has millions of dollars behind them to keep their players safe, and they can't even keep their stars from getting COVID. What are we doing sending our students back to school? But we'll see, I guess, how it plays out.
And so you're planning on attending your classes in the fall?
So most of my classes have gone online, thankfully. I'm asthmatic. I am very concerned about it. I don't want to get it in any way, shape, or form. I'm afraid that it would just kind of wreck me. OSU has passed some policies that are supposed to prevent professors from taking any form of attendance, so you can still technically do everything online. I don't know how it's going to work. Me and other students have had the same conversation. What happens when the professors whip out here's your daily quiz that you can't make up. But they are requiring we wear masks in person. They're providing every student on campus with a mask. If you are anywhere in a building, I think, and maybe even on campus, you do have to have the mask on. Mm-hmm. And so I know that the university at least has been as proactive as they can be, with also being told by the state that they need to open back up, because OSU is a public university. And so it's going to be interesting when we start. I don't know what to expect, but I don't expect it to continue for long, unfortunately. I just think that we'll get in there and it's going to spread like wildfire. They're still kids at that age. Some of them, it's easy to forget when you're excited to see your classmates for the first time in 8 months. And I don't foresee it ending well.
And through this whole quarantine, it sounds hard. And there's been also moments of missing out on maybe some events, right? So you had written this poem called Easter in Quarantine, and I'd love to hear you read it.
Easter in Quarantine. The red dirt digs deep under my nails. Red clay clings to the soles of my boots. Bright, warm sunshine sends storm clouds through Tornado Alley. The wind is chilly, but the day is warm. Spring has come. We usually work cattle on Easter. At least 16 hands are needed to corral, worm, vaccinate, and tag. I imagine my family surrounding the chute, hot shots cackling in the background as I hold a calf high in the air, a scalpel between my sister's teeth, some shit on our hands, some blood on her cheeks, and a can of numbing spray held tight between my thighs. Spring has come, and usually we work cattle on Easter. This year, though, we're all stuck inside. The boulder didn't move.
Wow.
For me, I think this piece was one of the bigger revelations of this quarantine. My niece was born in March. That was the last time I got to go home, early March. She's my second niece, and she actually has some conditions that make her extremely high risk. My sister doesn't ever really leave the house. They've been homebound since things kind of took off. And so I have not been home since then, haven't seen any of my family since March. My roommate, who I've been close with my whole life and is basically a sister to me, is moving back on Monday, and it's going to be the first time I've seen anybody I consider family in months. It's been hard. I am watching my nieces grow up over Snapchat, which I'm grateful to see, but it's hard because, they don't know me. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, and I love that I have the technology and the accessibility to get to see them still and get to see them changing and growing. But it's been hard not getting to experience the in-person things. My other niece turns 3 next week, and we're having a virtual birthday party. And so she kind of has an idea of what's going on. They've been really open with her about the situation. And she's a smarter 3-year-old, to be just entirely honest. And she will tell you, she says, we wear masks now. And she does good with her mask. She likes to wear it. And it's crazy, but she's excited for the virtual birthday party. I'm very grateful for the technology that we have to at least continue on in somewhat of a normal way and still remembering things like that in the midst of all the chaos.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think your poem really spoke to the stark differences that everybody is experiencing in this pandemic. So I'm not in Oklahoma, I'm in California. So tell me a little bit about how the school year ended for you. The quarantine's not over, but how did your school year kind of end? And what have you learned about yourself as a teacher or a writer during this time?
I think I've learned how important journaling is in my life more than anything. It's been crazy to be both an educator and an active student during this, because I've gotten both ends, and they are very starkly different on how they're affecting the other. And as a student, it's just been a bumpy transition. We're learning as we go, and I think that goes both ways. But as a student, it's also been kind of humbling to myself. And as an educator, it feels like it's been a major part of what's going to bring reform. I am in several little educator communities on social media, and I've seen so much talk of educators who have been in the field for their whole lives, whole careers, that are approaching the age of retirement, and they are saying no. I'm not going to go back to school. You're not going to force me, and I'll leave if I have to. And there's been discussion on how important those educators are, just as much as how important those are who stay, and how differently we're standing up for ourselves in all of this. It's been very communal too, to see all these educators rising up together, learning with each other in a way that I don't think we've ever had before. We've never had the chance to before. We've never been in this position, but given the position that we're in, it's been amazing to watch as educators join together to figure it out together. And it's one of my favorite things is to get on Facebook right now and see all my teacher groups and all the discussions going on about how they're transitioning online, how they're keeping their students' attention, even in such a chaotic setting of a lot of students' homes. And especially how we're getting them the technology, and the way that educators are joining forces together and getting their students connected to the classroom just as much as it is keeping them attentive in it. Mm-hmm. But it's been wonderful as a writer too. I think that I have found a place of reflection that I've never been able to write from. There are moments that, you have a little bit more alone time with yourself. And one of my tasks throughout this whole quarantine is, when my grandmother passed, I inherited all of it. I'm the youngest, but also I'm the only woman in the family, and I was just kind of like, here, this is yours. I got all the cookbooks, all the old family photos, and I am very grateful to have all of it. But my task has been sorting through it and kind of getting out stuff that I know my uncles and cousins would want. And it has been one of my favorite things to do. And I've learned so much about my family that I didn't know. And in that, I found a place, I think, of reflection that feels so good to write about, and to remind myself of how times have changed, and how they're always changing. This change is vastly different, but it's not foreign for change, and that will adapt regardless. And I have really enjoyed that part of quarantine. I've written a lot more in quarantine than I have in the past few years, and it feels good.
Awesome. Let's turn to then what's coming up for your future, which is, the fall is coming right around the corner. You talked a little bit about it, but what's next for school for you, and also for work? What's next for you as an educator as you move forward?
At the daycare, we're going on as usual. I spent all day yesterday in my classroom painting a jungle on my wall and decorating and just having a lot of fun in my classroom and preparing for my students for the school year there to start. And as a student, it's been kind of the same. I know that a lot of mine are going online. I'm very thankful that I already know this. It's Dr. Donovan who does run Ethical ELA, and she'll do everything on Zoom, which I didn't think I was going to like. But just from having her last semester, I have found Zoom to be a great substitute in this situation for the classroom setting, because at the very least, that connection to the class as a whole, and to the community of the classroom, and to the professor, where you do still have to, sit down and meet, has been very wonderful for me. I don't know that I could have done a lot of the work without that asset. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not dreading the school year like I know a lot of students are. I know that I have some great professors who are going to do everything in their power to make sure that we have the tools we need to succeed, and I am grateful for that. I know that doesn't stand true for everybody. OSU just has a wonderful education department, and I am kind of ready. I do have a couple that are staying in person. I don't know that I will go to them. I went ahead and bought my parking pass, and I just said, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I'm sure I'll end up at the library at some point. And so that's kind of been my philosophy. I'm just taking as it comes, and learning as we go.
And what are some things that you think you wish or you think need to change at either at the state level or at your school level? And what would you like the public to remember about COVID-19 and its impact on education?
I think that there's just so much to take away from it. To be entirely honest, it's hard to pinpoint anything. There has been so much new discussion about how poverty affects education. There's been so many new discussions about how we can have an accessible form of online learning that works and that keeps students engaged. And it's been great in that sense. I think it's also just been another eye-opening experience, and the next big step in education reform that needs to happen in our country. I have seen a lot of the groups of walkout groups, because Oklahoma was one of the states that walked out in 2017. And I've seen a lot of those groups that are gaining a lot more traction again. They're picking back up. Their social medias are gaining attention again. And that's not happening by mistake. You know, it's been a kind of hopeful experience to hopefully see some change soon. I know this is what I want for my life. I love all of my students. I know I have a passion for education and for learning and teaching. And for me, that's something I'm willing to follow regardless of some of the conditions. But that doesn't go for everybody. And there's a reason for that. And I'm hoping that this means that there is some change brought and that education can be a sustainable place for both the educators themselves and students in a way that we're not seeing now. I'm hoping that brings something out of it.
Wonderful. So we've been talking for a little bit now and kind of drawing towards the end of our interview. Is there anything else you'd want to add or say about this whole experience?
I think that for us here, I think that I've found that we're all very good at sticking together when things get tough. I don't think that any of us really know what's to come. It's going to be more transitioning and more learning as we go. But I also just think that we are good at sticking together in tough situations. And this has been tough, and it's been a crazy and kind of a hard experience for, I think, everybody. I don't think there's been anybody that's been unaffected by the things that are happening in our country and all over the world right now. But we are social beings. We stick together. We find a way. And I think that seeing stuff like Zoom take off like it did really shows our ambitions and how well we work around things when they happen. And so I think that, you know, we're going to be okay. We're going to see some change. It's going to be another bumpy road for the next few weeks, maybe next few semesters, but we'll get through it and we'll be stronger for it at the end.
Wonderful. So before we close, I just want to have you share one more poem that you've written, and maybe before you read it, you can talk a little bit about the poem, and then we'll end with your reading of it.
Okay, perfect. So, I mean, this is one of my favorite poems I think I've written since quarantine has started. Like I said, I've been kind of going through old family heirlooms and sorting. And part of that for me has been gaining a new kind of connection to my great-grandmother, who we call Mama. She was one of the most influential people in my life growing up, and she passed away from Alzheimer's in my sophomore year of college. If anything, I am just like her. I have found that more and more as I go through her things and the stuff that she has given me over time. She was just a phenomenal human being. It took a lot out of her when the Alzheimer's hit her. but she was one of the strongest people all through it. And for me, I always remember my grandmother as the 87-year-old woman who went ziplining and on roller coasters with me as a kid. She was just such a big influence in my life, and I've been finding photos, and one of the prompts on Sarah Donovan's Ethical ELA was on Alice Paul, and a picture of Alice Paul at the Seaward Belmont house. And it kind of inspired this piece, I think, because she just looked so much like my grandmother. I looked at her and I was like, wow, that could be Mama if I didn't know any better. And so I think that's where it came from for me. But on Alice Paul at the Seaward Belmont house, there will never be a new world order until women are a part of it. Alice Paul looks like my great-grandmother, or more accurately, Mama looked like her. The white home perm curls and flared nostrils, lips always pursed, ready to comment on your posture, or how one of the boys better take her fishing, or she was going to switch their asses like when they were children. Eyes that dealt discipline on a silent platter. Alice probably avoided photographs if she could. She probably laughed with a wide open smile, her head tossed backwards. She never missed the chance to tell you her opinion. Mama, though, was a different kind of feminist. The kind that leaves her husband when he hit her, pregnant and full of life. I imagine her sailor mouth chattering under her breath as she walked, belly and all, to the doorstep of her mother's home. She would drink her red beer and cut her friend's hair until she had a beauty parlor to call home. And there, she drank water. She raised 4 boys that weren't hers, and it should have been 5, because it was the right thing to do. She always made sure everyone was fed and had a place to sleep. She slept in a bed on her own and married a man because he took pictures of her instead of the mountains cascading around her. Alice Paul looks like my great-grandmother, or more accurately, Mama looks like her.
Thank you so much for your time today, Abigail. It's been wonderful speaking with you.
Thank you. I had a great time.